Hello fellow wand lovers. It's time for Techter buffs. Today's list is rather short, so let's not beat around the bush and get right into it. Every compound technique has been buffed by 15%. Well, except Zandian, which was buffed by 14.75%. Slightly less than the others, but no big deal. Now, what I believe this buff was trying to accomplish is to make compound techniques stronger than the wand counter. As you can see on the screen, the techniques hovered around the same DPS as wand counter attacks. And this is not counting the damage you gain overall from building the Revoke Pursuit gauge. This meant that compounds were often not worth using outside of situations where the enemy was stunned, since you won't be able to parry when the enemy isn't attacking. And even in those situations where the enemy was stunned, compounds often had to compete with jet intensity. This jet boots ability, despite not having main class weapon bonus, dealt so much damage that it was almost a necessity to have jet boots attached to your wand multi-weapon. Of course, recently we got dual quests which use augments that only buff main class weapons, and now even Ark's records punish you for using a subclass weapon. But outside of these two specific scenarios, jet boots were too valuable to get rid of. So, now we're encouraged to use our own burst damage buttons, rather than rely on subclass weapons. And our sub-palettes can finally breathe again. Buffing compound techniques was very smart, because it is damage-only Force and Techters, using their respective main class weapons, can benefit from. I point this out because it wasn't uncommon for braver mains to just run Katana on Force or Techter, and get high scores for these classes. Not only high scores, but scores that weren't achievable with rods, Talis, or wands. Most people probably don't care about stuff like that, but for me it's very discouraging when trying to get a high score myself. Now, the big question is, what about Force subclass? That's unfortunately something I can't answer from a purely theoretical standpoint, since it involves a lot of moving parts that are hard to account for. On paper, even if we build compounds faster than we know what to do with, it's no longer necessarily a DPS loss to use compounds without the enemy being stunned. So maybe Force subclass is at least on par with Bouncer and Slayer, but that is a big maybe. Compounds aren't the only thing that was buffed today though. Tricky Capacitor saw a 7% buff from 700 to 750 potency. There isn't much to talk about, other than it's a little bit disappointing. A few months ago, when the whole Twitter beef about Talis was happening, I made a post in the official Discord server suggesting a buff that increased the potency from 700 to 800, and that this buff should be explicitly only done to the single target version of Tricky Capacitor, since the AoE version was fine. But here, the buff applies to all versions, so it still feels like single target Talis DPS is just shackled to how it's supposed to perform in mobbing situations. It's better than nothing, but still a bummer. And that's about it for this update. How do you feel about it? I'm very happy over the buffs overall, since compounds felt like they really needed it. Talis really needed a buff too, but this unfortunately feels like a half step forward. Anyway, I don't want to hold your attention for too long. I'll see you guys in Lucille Exploration. Take care!